My name's Holly. For those who don't know me, this is Alyssa. We are super excited. Bob and Christy are back home from their vacation. They were very, very missed last week. I want to take a second and just invite you to close your eyes with me and just take some deep breaths. We work really hard around here to just focus our attention on the community that is this place. It's part of why we don't have big lights and flashy shows and I don't know about you, but I know that even when sometimes there's tension and sometimes there's high emotions, I am so grateful for this community. I'm grateful for the uniqueness that is in each and every single one of us. I'm thankful for the talents and the experiences and the passions that make up this space. I'm thankful for the generosity and the graciousness. Every single one of you matters. I'm going to invite you as we start tonight off. We're going to share a song with you, and Christy kind of prompted us for music this week to pick a few songs that feel like TCG. And this is a song that we did a lot during the COVID era when we were online. So we honestly don't know if you like it or not because we couldn't see your faces back then, but it's a song that I think has meant a lot to us and definitely not a mainstream worship song, but it's called Wild World. And in essence, it just talks about finding our place in this world. And I think if nothing else, our hope is that we always are pushing forward this message that we all matter, that we can all work to make this world a better place, that there is no one who is too broken, too messed up, that they are invaluable to us, to God, to this planet. So I invite you to listen, sing along if you want. I hope this song means something to you.
But the truth seems to change every Tuesday. And when I watch the news, man, it just gives me the blues. No one listens, just on a mission to hear their own voice. It's a wild world, we're all trying to find our place in it. It's a wild world and no one sees you got to give way.
That's why we say love out loud, right? This next song is one that we actually, I think it was one of the first songs we did back when TCG was just a baby church and we didn't know what we were doing. It's a song called Mountain, and it really just declares that there are mountains and there are valleys. And it acknowledges both, but that God is consistent. And so I invite you guys to sing along with this if you'd like. You are always welcome. If you are able to stand, you are always welcome to dance. You are welcome to sit, to kneel, whatever feels right to you. We invite you to just be.
I've seen your grace from the mountain. I've held you there in the valley below. I see your love and your mercy, guiding me. I know you're in every season. I feel your hand bringing peace and control. Jesus, your love is my anchor. You're my only hope. You're my only hope. I will trust in you. I will not be moved. High on the mountain, I will be lifting my voice, and in the valley, I will be dancing for joy in every season. You are worthy in every moment. You are my light and salvation. My God is with me, there's nothing to fear. Jesus, our hope, our redemption. Your presence is here. Your presence is here. I will trust in you. I will not be moved. High on the mountain, I will be lifting my voice, and in the valley, I will be dancing for joy in every season. You are worthy in every moment. We won't be silent, our hearts on fire. Jesus, our victory. This song of triumph, this song inside us. Jesus, our victory. High on the mountain, I will be lifting my voice, and in the valley, I will be dancing for joy in every season. You are worthy in every moment.
Oh God. God our parent, God our creator. Oh, make us aware of your presence. The presence that is, God, so comforting and loving, no matter what we go through, no matter where we are. God, help us to see you, help us to know you. As Christy and Bob both come up and just share their hearts tonight, I pray that, Lord, you would just speak through them. We are here and we are listening. In your name, amen.
Hey, everybody. I've missed you so much. So, funny story. When we first started dating,
I don't know where this is going.
Bob would always joke and say, "You're a Bible thumper, and I'm not ever going to go to church with you." And I said, "That's cool." And I just kept doing my thing. And then he'd come with me from time to time. And then he'd say things like, "Well, I'll go to church with you once in a while, but I'm never going to go to like a small group with you." And then one day we were leading a small group, and I was like, "Do you remember that time that you said you'd never lead a small group?" And so then one day I was like, "Man, I'm really feeling called into ministry." And he was like, "That sounds like something for you to do. I will never do those things with you, but I'll support you, but never ever ask me to preach." So I just want this moment acknowledged.
God is fun. He's full of lots of jokes.
So Holly said we were on vacation. That's probably not the most accurate way to put it. We were on a very long trip for not a fun reason. Bob's mom passed away last week, and it's really expensive to fly on short notice just with one person, let alone with 3 teenagers. And so we thought it would be a good idea to drive to New York. Oh, that was oh man, 40 hours we did in the last week in the car. And we learned a lot of lessons on the road. And so I was planning to, we're doing all year on Psalms, and the last kind of few weeks we've been focusing on Psalm 119 as kind of this big deep dive into the biggest book in Scripture, right? Psalm 119 has like 169 verses. I mean, there's a lot to go through there. And so I was kind of working on message prep, and I had something prepared, and you all know me and poor Holly and Alyssa have to get used to me being like, "I think we're going to change things," usually at the last minute. And man, as like, how like a sponge sits and soaks in something, and then like when you lift it up, it just like kind of drips out, right? And that's kind of how I feel about Psalms 119 right now. It was like I've just kind of sat in it and I've soaked in it, and I couldn't help but notice things along our trip that kind of paralleled some of these verses. And so I need you to understand something about Psalm 119 before we dig in. So Bob and I were having this conversation this morning, and I was like, I can do this for us, but I really thought it would be good for us to do this together. Because part of what you need to understand about Psalm 119 is it's not just this big, long-winded narrative from David, right? It's a very special, very beautiful, very intimate, and very unique passage of Scripture from David. It's one of the last passages that David writes. And it's kind of like this heart dump from David to Solomon. It's literally 169 verses that almost read kind of like this bullet point list of like things I want to tell my child before I'm gone. Things I want you to remember when you're on your own and I'm not here anymore to tell you these things. These are 169 lessons from my heart to your heart. And he knew that this wasn't just going to be any son. This was the son, Solomon, who was going to inherit the throne. He was going to have to lead a nation that was increasingly more divided. He knew that Solomon was going to face huge obstacles and challenges. And so David wanted to make sure he had these things kind of written and recorded for Solomon. And so kind of set against that backdrop, here's what I want to do is I want to give you 4 lessons from Psalm 119, but from our road trip, and there was a whole lot of lessons from the road to pick from. But I want to start with verse 28. This one really kind of stood out to me as we set out and we began. Verse 28, David writes, "I weep with sorrow, encourage me by your word." One of the things that I love so much about David's heart is that David had a passion for Scripture and he had a passion for God. And he relationally sought after God and sought to understand God through reading and studying Scripture. But here's something I want you to understand, is that the more that we spend time trying to understand the heart of God, the more that our hearts become shaped to be like God's. And so the more that we spend in God's word, the more time that we spend in community that is centered on faith and love and mercy and grace, the more that our heart starts to reflect those kind of things. And so I want you to hear from our hearts tonight that while we were in a season this week of weeping for sorrow, that we were overwhelmed with encouragement from your words and your love, which have been shaped by your application of God's commandment to love and to bear one another's burdens and to be there for one another in times of sorrow.
Absolutely. It was a very hard week. And as we look at that, encouraged in the word, and I'm always encouraged by God's word, but I'm tremendously encouraged by the people that God had put into our life. This, from all the words of acclamation and the I love yous and the I'm sorry's and the if you need anything, to the people that stepped up church to make sure church ran last week and all the other programs got to run last week, and to all the people that helped out, that made it financially possible for us to do this, because we wouldn't have been able to go home. That being said, that was always all amazing because it wasn't expected, because I wasn't going to go home. I had no intention. I'm going back to New York, and my wife reached out to a few people, and it just spread like wildfire. And so without all of our TCG family and friends, we would not have been able to make this very important trip that we had to make. And it was good for my soul to be there. It really was.
I think that all of us have had an experience in our life where we've wept with sorrow, right? Where we've just felt broken, where we felt like we were at the bottom, where we have just felt like kind of grief knocked us out, like knocked our knees out from under us, and we just kind of buckled. And what I want you to hear, and what I think that David wanted Solomon to hear, is he writes that encouragement, right? Is that when I weep with sorrow, I'm encouraged by the word. Both the word that was written in Scripture, but also I'm encouraged by the words of people that I can surround myself with. I'm encouraged by the words of affirmation and love and encouragement by people who are like-minded and like-hearted and understand and are there, not just on our mountaintops, like we just sang about. We've all got people like that, right? Like they are there for the party. They are there for the mountaintop. They are there to celebrate with you. But dadgummit, they're nowhere to be found when you're in the valley. They're nowhere to be found when you're sliding and you can't find anybody to help you or throw you a rope or climb down into the dust and the dirt and the muck and the mire with you. And I think this week was a beautiful reminder for us that we have a lot of people in our world who are willing to take that slide with us. And we felt that love for a lot of hours this week.
Absolutely, and we do appreciate it from the bottom of our heart. It was, like I said, a hard week, but knowing that there was people there to help us climb back up the hill and to carry us when we needed to be carried.
So these verses we pulled out, they're not connected, so they're going to kind of feel like they're kind of all over the place. So another day, we were driving, and here's something that I learned on our drive. I learned that there is something about the Northeast that, like, they just have the prettiest stinking sunsets that I've ever seen in my whole life. And so I'm going to have Scott pull up this picture for us. So this verse that we're going to kind of talk about, so this was a sunset we saw one night driving in, and I was just like, have you ever just seen something so beautiful that like you just are like, oh my gosh? Like,
The picture doesn't do it justice.
yeah, it really doesn't. Like, it was just the entire sky. It was so big and it was so huge. And there's this verse in Psalm 119 that I just kept thinking about that night. And we're driving and we're looking at this. And I mean, this sunset went on forever. It went on for like an hour, it felt like. In fact, like I was so impacted by it, I'm like FaceTiming people. I'm like, look at this sunset. And like I FaceTimed Ollie and Scott and the kids, and Ellie was like, that's nice, Aunt Christy. Can I talk to Lynn? So they didn't appreciate it quite as much. So maybe there's a lesson for you. It's just not quite the same on FaceTime. But David writes in verse 55, he says, I reflect at night on who you are, O Lord. Therefore, I obey your instructions. You know, I think there's just something about the end of the day, right? There's something about, it's been a long day, it's been a hard day, and there's just something about like that moment as the sun starts to set and the stars kind of start to come out and we kind of start to wind down for the night. Like, what does that look like for you? Because for me, I'm having to try to be more intentional, and you help me do that. Sometimes I can just like scoot right through that and just keep my head down and keep working, right? And like this beauty is going on outside and I miss it because I'm like trying to plow through my to-do list or write a paper, or I'm trying to, you know, read this article, or I'm trying to do this or that. And there's something about that time of the evening, just taking a few minutes to just catch your breath, to just reflect on what happened that day. What did I learn today? What did I see today that inspired me? What did I experience today that I've never experienced before? What opportunities did I have today? And I think there's something about changing your place that often changes your perspective, right? Or there's something about changing your pace that also changes your perspective. I wasn't going 100 miles an hour like I feel like I am most of the time when I'm here. We were going 75 miles an hour for a really long time. But my perspective was different. I was focused on different things. And so, Scott, will you show that second set of pictures? So, is that not crazy? So, when we decided to go back, Bob's from a little town in New York called Ogdensburg that doesn't really have a whole lot of options on where to stay. And so I thought we were gonna have to stay in the next town and like drive. And I started looking, and I found this little tiny Airbnb that was like, it says it's on the river. And I was like, okay, like that sounds great. And then we got there and I'm like, oh dang, it's like on the river. And so like the United States like literally ended outside of the door because across the way there is Canada. And so I'm like, we are literally staying at the edge of the country. But I cannot explain to you how healing and cathartic that space was for me at night. And I want to just like challenge you to share from your heart, because I know we came back. This was actually taken right after Bob's mom's service. And so we left the funeral home and we came back and just sat on the back porch and just watched the sun go down. And I think it was just a really beautiful moment.
It was an amazing moment, and I think it set in my heart more of the peace that I needed to have, saying goodbye to my mother, to be able to come back to a place like this, enjoy a sunset like this. And we got to sit out there as a family. Our oldest couldn't be there, and that was hard. But
we FaceTimed him.
We did FaceTime him. But everybody was there, and it was just such a healing space. It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was just something that we don't get a lot of normally in our life. And so to be able to sit there and then to see this, I mean, that's just was like the perfect sign at the end of a horrible day. So, it was just amazing. I mean, I got to see my family. It went off pretty good, actually. There was no craziness, really. And so it was a blessing to be able to see everybody and be able to introduce the kids to everybody and my wife on an extremely hard day. But I'm thankful that I was there, and this just made it such a huge relief to get back and to not have to deal with chaos and to be in such a beautiful place that it was just truly relaxing. I think it just took a huge load off of.
So, but here's what I kind of pondered, and this is why I chose to share this verse and kind of pull these pictures out, because I'm going to be really authentic. Like, sometimes for me to have those kind of moments, I literally have to go to the other side of the country, and that's not okay. And I recognize that that's not okay, and I recognize that that is a growing edge for me. And I recognize that sometimes I get so consumed with the brokenness and all the things that are wrong in our city and around us, and all of my frustrations and all of my efforts to try to pursue justice and to do things and to bring about change, I realize that I miss things. And so I think more than anything, I wanted to pull this verse out and kind of this lesson from the road, because I think part of what David's trying to say to Solomon, again, this big chapter is just kind of this very random collection of wisdom. And I think he's trying to say there's something important about taking time at the end of the day, catching your breath, counting your blessings, taking a moment to reflect on some lessons, taking a moment to just take in what is around you and who is around you, and be grateful for that. For a long time, I've kind of called that my spiritual scavenger hunt every day. Like, I challenge myself every day. I want to see God move in some way around me every day. And I have to look for it, right? It doesn't often come with the flashing neon sign. And so sometimes it's somebody else's smile, somebody that sits down and I get to talk to them at the OC, and that blesses me way more than it probably helped them. Sometimes it's a beautiful sunset. Sometimes it is a crazy sing-along on a long road trip that was hysterical, that we will not talk about. But there's these moments, right? And so what I want you to hear, and like this lesson that I want to challenge you with from our crazy trip, is like, look for those moments. You don't have to go to the end of the country and be surrounded by beauty to find beauty, to find the holy, to find the divine, to find love that is whispered into nature and through people and all around us. And I know I take that for granted way too often. And that's something that I know that I need to work on. And I think it's something that the pace, right? The pace of our lives often keeps us from seeing and noticing those things.
Absolutely, and I just think it's something that we need to work on together, and as a church family, and because I think as a whole, most of our friends and family are all partake in PCG in some way and form, and I think it's important, no matter where you're at, to take those opportunities to enjoy the natural beauty and the things that just happen in a day-to-day life, because it's hard, right? And we can fly by all that stuff and never ever notice it, right? That, like Christy said, that smile that somebody looks at you with, and just the heartfeltness that you can get from somebody just from saying hi, just from acknowledging somebody and speaking to them, to the amazing sunsets, or look out across the road. I mean, the field, the trees. I mean, it's just a natural beauty, right? And so we just need to learn how to take advantage and to take those things in and not let them all pass by us, because I know that we're bad about that.
So here's what I'm going to challenge you with. You ready? TCG homework. So when you talk to people this week, here's a great question for you with people. How have you seen God move around you today? How have you seen him today? How have you experienced God today? How have you felt blessed? Or how have you experienced the holy or the divine today? And challenge, because you know what? I'm pretty sure if somebody stopped me and I'd be like, I got to think about that a minute. Because it's not something you can just spout up. It really forces us to wrestle and to think and to reflect. And I think that we need to make more time and space for that, all of us do. Lesson number 3. Lesson number 3 came from this verse. Help me abandon my shameful ways, for your regulations are good. And this verse kind of just kept coming to my mind. we got to go inside of the church where Bob grew up, and we got to see where Bob was baptized. So I want to show you these pictures, because this is a whole different ballgame than TCG. So, you know, upstate New York, this church is probably 200 years old. It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. Like the baptistry, you can't see in these pictures. I didn't put it in there, but it's like this crazy ornate fountain. And I'm like, we have a blow-up hot tub. You want to see a picture? And so, this is the second time that I've been in this space with Bob. And I think the first time that we were in this space, one of the things that I took away from being in that space with him was a better understanding of like your spiritual journey. And like when you used to tell me like how formal everything was, I was like, okay, you know, I grew up pretty conservative and what I felt like was formal, and then I went into here, I was like, oh dang, okay, like I get it. But that wasn't really what I was reflecting on this time. This time, we took a picture, and I didn't put it in here. I probably should have, but I asked Bob, so Bob used to go to church with his dad, and I asked you, I said, where did you and your dad used to sit? And like kind of in the room, what pew? Because we've all got our spot, right? Like, I look around, you guys are pretty much all in your spots. I don't know, Christy's on the wrong side of the room tonight, but like, you know, we kind of get comfortable. We're creatures of habit. We kind of have a spot. And I said, where was your spot? Where do you and your dad sit? And I took a picture of him and Tana, Bob's daughter, that not all of you have met. She's in town right now from Oregon. And I took a picture of the two of them in the pew where he and his dad used to sit. And I kind of wanted you to share just a little bit, because who you were when you went to church with your dad and why you went to church with your dad, and who you are today sitting in this space, I think is kind of an embodiment of what David's saying when he talks to Solomon and he says, help me abandon my shameful ways. And I told Bob that word shameful is kind of hard. I think you could substitute a lot of words there, like self-seeking ways or prideful ways or stubborn ways, because I think that's the intent of what David was meaning. Like, help me abandon my pursuit of me, because your regulations, your word, your path is good. And I think that's what he's trying to say to Solomon is like, I love you as your father, and I want you to know that life's not all about you, and like have a bigger picture. And so I just kind of asked if you'd be willing to share a little bit of that.
So, you know, just going back into the church stirred up a lot of things, you know. So when I was young and I was going to church, I didn't go to church for God. I didn't. I went to church because my dad was sick. We didn't get to spend a lot of one-on-one time. So I went to church because my dad went to church. And after church, me and my dad would always get to go do something special. We'd go get a donut. We'd go get a Slim Jim. Sometimes that was a little shady. We might have been at the bar, and I was young and didn't realize it. But I went for my dad, and that's why I went to church. And I went all the way to the point that I actually made my confirmation. If you could picture that altar, me being an altar boy, I actually carried the candle in the procession. I sat off to the left of the pews there. It was a huge, huge deal to go and watch that. But as I got to realize this, see this again, and bring some thoughts about my father and about life, I realized, you know, at the point when, you know, we talk about the shameful things that we need to forget, I walked away from God when, between my 6th and 7th grade year, when my grandmother passed away. My dad became pretty much unable to get out of bed anymore. So I walked away from God, and, you know, we talked about changing the shameful, and I think it's important because there was parts of my life that were definitely shameful. I lived a not so good life for a long time. I did things that I regret. I've said, done, hurt people, things I'm still trying to make amends for. But saying that, as we walked through that and I found my way back to God, God gave me an amazing gift when he brought Christy into my life. She guided me to areas. He used her. She won't say yes, but he used her to guide me along the path, and I am grateful for that. But as I look back, and I can say, there is times in my life, even though I walked away from the Lord, he was still walking along beside of me. My heart was not in it when I was a kid going to church, but his was, and he walked alongside of me. There is more than one encounter in my life right now where I would not be here today, and there's no reason that I am here today other than God was walking alongside me and prevented it, and he must have had some other kind of path that he wanted me to walk, because there were several of them that would have ended up with me dead and or in jail, and I think that would have altered my life extremely, that I may not have been where I am today. And I'm not saying I didn't do things wrong, because I did, but I was very blessed. And so walking out this side of it, you know, meeting my Bible thumper wife and learning to go to church and learning to fall in love with God and truly fall in love with God really changed my heart. It changed my perspective on the world, and it made me look back at all the amazing things that God did for me, even when I didn't want nothing to do with him. So this kind of stirred up that whole feelings as we were going through it. I hadn't been in there in a long time, maybe 12 years since we went home.
Well, and this was kind of a lesson that I was pondering to share with you, because I think it's hard to pray that prayer, right? Like, help me change my ways, because ways are set in stone. We're creatures of habit. It's not so easy to change, right? Like, there's a whole lot of things involved in change. There's mental health, and there's addictions, there's shelter, there's financial challenges, there's support systems, there's family dynamics. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that when we say, help me to change, that we're saying, like, here's my mess of stuff. I don't even know where to start. But really what I'm saying is, I want things to be different. And so I think what I want you to hear more than anything from this lesson and kind of this verse where David's saying, help me abandon my shameful ways, for your regulations are good. Like, I think that he's really kind of imploring to Solomon especially, like, realize David was not a perfect dude, right? Like, David had a lot of faults. David had a lot of struggles. He did a lot of things that were shameful. But David didn't hide those things. He owned those things. They were part of his journey, and they were part of his story. And I think there is power in us sharing our lessons of the past. And when we're willing to say, let me tell you why I get it. Let me tell you why I believe that you can make changes, because I made changes. So let me take you and walk you through my journey, because it's not been easy either. And there was something really beautiful, and I know really hard, when right before we left Ogdensburg, Bob gave us the Bob Love tour of Hits, and drove us like all through this little town. And he was like, and I went to that bar, and I went to that bar, and you know, and I broke that window, and like all of these different things. And you know, the kids were making a lot of jokes about, like, man, you know, you were in a lot of trouble, like all these kind of things. And I think one of the most powerful moments for me was, like, Bob took them around the corner, and there's this empty lot, and he said, he kind of paused in the street, and he said, there was a house here once, and I used to stay here with my friends all the time. And one night, I just woke up in the middle of the night and decided to walk home. And he said, and you remember that pizza place I showed you a while ago? He was like, I walked all the way back there in the middle of the night in a snowstorm. And I don't know why I did it, but that night that house burned to the ground. And he was like, in the room I was in, I wouldn't have gotten out of. And I think there was just something in the car with 3 teenagers who, you know everything, for them to just kind of be like, oh, and like understand and connect to that. And so I say that to you as a lesson for all of us, right? Share your stories, share the hard things, share the beautiful things, share the messy things, share the places where you have seen God move. Because when you share your journey to change, I think it helps other people realize that change is possible and that nobody's got it all together, right? It's easy for us to look at somebody in this season and think like, oh, you know, I wish my life was more like this. And it's like, oh, first of all, you don't know what you're asking for. Second of all, like, you don't know what the journey to this has looked like, because everybody's journey is different. You want to say something else?
I was just gonna, echo the same thing. It is of the utmost importance to be willing to share your stories, because you don't know how that's gonna help, right? I share my stories, and hopefully by sharing my stories with my kids, and by sharing, I know other people have heard that story about the house burning down, and I think it's important for us to be open and honest and share those stories, because if we can prevent somebody from making maybe some of the same mistakes, or at least think about those things, we could save somebody's life, right? And we can.
Well, and I would say this too. I would say that, like, shame thrives in the shadows, right? So, like, the more we don't talk about something, the more that we feel ashamed about it, the more that other people feel like it's something to be ashamed of. So, like, the more we talk about something, and, like, whether that's our own mental health struggles, our own, troubled past, our own struggle with addictions or whatever, the more that we talk about it, the more that we rob shame of its power.
Oh, definitely. And just as you say that, it just rings so true in my head. I guess I never, encompassed that, but, as I've been able to talk freely about my life and the things I've done, it has broken chains where I don't feel like, because when I first got, when I first gave my life to the Lord, I felt very shackled to those things, to the point like where things happened in my life, I thought God was punishing me for all the things that I had done in my life. But I have to come to that realization that God took those from me, and He is not punishing me for those. But as I have used my story, and hopefully I've been able to help people, you never really know. You plant seeds, you give things, you don't know what it is. But it has broke the chains for me to feel free, to be able to even love God more, because when you're shackled, right, you can't love the potential that you have to love. And so as I've been able to share that stuff and talk about my past, make amends for my past, that's a hard one, it's another story, but I feel like it has freed me to be able to love more by letting that stuff go.
Well, and I think change is noticeable, right? Like, when you make change in your life and in your situation, even the smallest of change, people notice that. And it's like, something's different, like you're doing something different. And sometimes it's in the, oh, I bet this won't last long, or this won't succeed, right? Like, you've got those kind of people. They're the mountaintop people. Like, hey, if this succeeds, I'll be there to celebrate with you. But, like, I'm just going to watch from up here and see if you can make the climb. And I think we probably could have had like a lemonade drinking game at the reception. The kids and I, we kind of had like a running joke, because every person that would come up and was like, man, Bobby, because everybody in the back home calls him Bobby, like, Bobby, I would have never imagined this is who you'd be today. Or like, man, you've come so far. Or like, wow, I can't believe that this is who you are today. And like, the kids and I were like 3, 4, like... Because change is noticeable, right? And like, not being in the same space and carrying the same weights is noticeable. And I think it was interesting and kind of fun to watch people's reaction to how different life is for you today.
Oh, absolutely. And a little difficult, right? Because when you go back to that space, not everybody really truly realizes where you are, right? So there's this expectation, that, hey, this is Bob, we're gonna go out, have a couple beers, we're gonna go do whatever. And, when they realize that that's not really gonna happen, so then you gotta have that interaction where it's a strange period, it's a strange, up until just a few years ago, my brother used to tell me when I come home, we'd have a beer together, and I'm like, I'm almost 20 years sober, I'm not coming home to have a beer with you. But you know what I mean? It's that expectation is kind of hard to, not knowing, I guess, the expectations are, but not knowing how it's going to be received when you reject those things or whatever. So that's a whole nother little thing.
So I got 2 more lessons for you, and we're going to wrap up. After we left Ogdensburg, we decided to take a little detour and drive a couple hours out of our way and go spend some time at Niagara Falls, because it's not far, and I didn't know if we'd ever be back up that way and the kids would ever get that experience. And so we stayed at Niagara Falls, and that night when we got into town, we went down to the park, and there's like this kind of like whole state park area for the falls. And then, so we're walking along this long trail. It's about a mile long to get up to the falls. And so we found this tree. Scott, if you'll show this picture, then we'll go. Okay, so we find this tree, and it is literally like growing in the middle of like a dead log. And it's a tree. I know it kind of looks like a weed there, but I promise you it's a tree. And we just like, I don't know, we stayed, and like the kids were like, are you gonna keep staring at the tree? And I was like, and I told Bob, I was like, I don't know, there's just like this thing about like, man, there's so much resilience in that picture, right? Like, you are all by yourself, you are weathering storms and strong current and like all of these kind of things. And again, I've been reading Psalm 119, and I kept thinking about like verse 61 says this. It says, evil people try to drag me into sin, but I am firmly anchored in your instructions. And I kind of felt like that's what this picture was to me. It was like, how many times do we feel like I am trying to do the right thing? I am trying to make the changes. I am trying to get on a different path. I'm trying to break the cycles in my life and my family, and I want things to be different. And sometimes it feels a lot like we're that little tree, and there is nobody around, and it is us against a really strong current, and you've got to weather the waves and the wind and the storms all by yourself. And I know that many of you in this room can relate to this picture, and you can relate to this analogy, because I think we've all been there in seasons and in times. But I think we've got to, one of the things I want you to ponder in that picture is like, you can't see those roots, and there's no way you're getting out there to take a picture of them, but like, I can only imagine, right? Like, how wide those roots must be. Like, have you ever been on something where it's kind of shaky, and so like instead of standing normally, all of a sudden you're like, whoa, like I'm gonna take up more area, I'm gonna anchor myself to the ground. And like, I have to believe that it's got wide roots, it's got thick roots, right, that are strong. They may not be able to go very deep in that space, but man, they are clinging to what they are wrapped around, right? And the thing you've got to wrestle with in ourselves, and when we feel like we're in seasons like that, is, what are my roots wrapped around? What am I clinging to? What am I anchoring myself in? Because if we're putting all of our everything, right, into a romantic relationship, into a person, into a job title, into an amount of money, into some degree of perfection or expectation, one way or another, those things are probably going to give way at some point, right? But Scripture says that God is faithful and true, like a steady rock that never changes. That you can plant yourself and anchor yourself in who God is. And God is not going to leave, and God is not going to fail. And so I don't know what the currents are and the storm is that you're weathering right now, but I know this, that there are always going to be people that are going to say, that looks really hard. You sure you don't want to come over here? You sure you don't want to hang out on the shore? It's a whole lot more fun over here. Like, over here, you don't have to hang on for dear life. Over here, you don't have to work so hard. Like, come and hang out over here, right? Or like, it's really fun to ride these waves for a little while, right? Come out and swim with us and just relax. And yeah, that ride would not end well. You'll see that in a minute.
Yeah, I was gonna say, not when you see how it ends. And just so you know, this picture is crazy to me because it looks like it was painted. And this was taken with my cell phone.
Bob walked around for like 5 minutes and he was like, look, it looks like a painting. Do you see it?
It was crazy. I was like, that's like, just a...
Total strangers. Do you see this picture? It looks like a painting. So.
It was crazy.
But I felt like that was something that, like, as we looked at that tree, it just reminded me so much of that. And I know that all of us in this room, like, we wrestle with relationships, right? And we wrestle with the impact that relationships have on us. And if you are not surrounding yourself with people who are going to scream at you from the shore, you've got this, hold on, I believe in you, you can do this, like, don't give up, don't let go, then you're surrounding yourself with the wrong people. And that's one of the most important things that we can do in our life, is choose the people and the voices that speak into our lives wisely and carefully, because they shape who we are, where we go, what we see, and what we do. And so I think this was a big takeaway for me. And again, I think as David's talking to Solomon, right, like that's probably one of the greatest lessons we continue to try to impart on our kids, is like, surround yourself with good people.
And I was just going to add, as you know, Christy was talking about that, and it's also going to be one of the hardest things that you have to do. Because drawing those lines, and as I've talked to many, drawing those lines in the sand are hard, but then reinforcing those lines are extremely hard. Right? We can draw the sand and then somebody steps over it. We can draw the line and somebody steps over it. But someday when we draw the line, then we have to build a fence. And then it depends on what size fence you have to put in there. If it's a little fence, if it's a 4-foot fence, a 6-foot fence. And there may be a gate someday where you can go through that gate and be part of those people's lives, but you have to draw those things, because you cannot get sucked into the current, because it will tear you down, and you'll see why you wouldn't want to get sucked into this current here. And I think it's a perfect example of life. I think it's a perfect example of what happens to us when we allow ourselves to get sucked back into that lifestyle, get sucked back by the people that don't want us to be better than them, right? So you'll see as we go along, it would be crazy ride. I'm telling you what, I'm not going down that road again, because I don't want to be in the bottom of that.
Yeah. So I wanna kind of share with you. Wednesday was like this crazy spiritual experience for me, and like, I'm a really visual person. I've told you guys that here a lot. So like, sometimes when I see things, man, it just connects like in a whole deeper, crazy level. So one of the most iconic and well-known verses from all of Psalm 119 is verse 105. And it says, your word is a lamp into my feet and a light for my path, right? Amy Grant made that famous back in the like late 80s, early 90s. But your word is a light and a guide for my feet and a light for my path. And so Wednesday, Tuesday and Wednesday, I want to kind of show you, okay, walk through this experience with me, because I hope that it blesses you as much as it blessed me through pictures. So Scott, start with this first one. Okay, so this first picture is before we got to the tree, okay? So like, you start walking, like you walk up and you're like, oh, this is really chill. Like, it's a big, beautiful lake. This is beautiful, right? Kind of looks like where we just came from. And then like literally 1 minute later, the water starts to look more like this. And I was like, whew, like that picked up fast, right? Like it was just the smooth, calm, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, here we go. But here's what blew me away, and Bob and I were both just like, holy cow, there is no fence. Like,
not until very far down the path before they started.
You can literally like walk down to the water. And I just kept thinking, like, how much that's like life, right? Like, we can get really close. Like, oh, I bet I could stick my toe in. Like, it's probably not going to do it. Oh, I bet I can put my ankle in. Like, right? Like, how I bet I could stand here for a minute, and if I hold on to something, right? And like, before we know it, something gives way, and like, we are in over our heads, and things have gone so far so fast. Like, it's this playing with temptation, right? Like, oh, one time won't hurt me, or oh, nobody's gonna know, or it's not really that bad. And then before we know it, we've gotten sucked in to something that we never intended to be involved in. And so this next picture, so like this water just kind of, you know, keeps going. You're walking for a mile, and then like, you know that feeling where you're like, uh-oh, like this isn't working so well. Like, I need to get out of this. Like, white flags, somebody get me out of here kind of thing, right? And again, David's saying, like, here's the path, Solomon. Like, God's word is going to light your path and tell you where to go. And I kept looking at this as we just barely started to get up to the falls at night, when they kind of light it all up. And it's like, you could hear the noise, you knew things were coming, but you couldn't quite see it yet, but you're kind of thinking, oh, dang. Here it comes, right? Has anybody ever had that moment in our life? Kind of like, oh, I think I've gone to a tipping point and I don't know how to get out on the other side of this. And it moves so fast, right? And life changes so fast and things fall apart so fast in those moments. So go ahead, Scott. And it's beautiful, right? Like, it's gorgeous. But like, here's something that I thought about. First of all, like, sometimes to get to see a beautiful view, you gotta like huff it, right? That was a long walk. And sometimes you gotta like jockey for position a little bit, right? Like, you gotta work for some of that. Like, it was crowded, and Lynn just walked up to some really old person, bless their heart, and said, "Can you move, please? I'd like to see." And I was like, "You can't say that." So, but sometimes I think that our paths take us to places that we don't expect, right? And sometimes our paths take us to places that we think we're going to, but when we get there, it's nothing like what we completely imagined. Like, I was like, oh, I bet it's going to be pretty. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it's like gorgeous, right? So we stayed here for a while, and then they shot off fireworks over the falls, which was also really cool. We didn't even know that was going to happen. And then we went back, and here's the conversation as we're going back. Bryson, who is getting ready to be a sophomore at MU, he goes, I mean, it was cool, but I really feel like it's really over-commercialized, and, you know, it was just really crowded, and that kind of killed the vibe, and it would have been really cool if it was out in the middle of nowhere, and, you know, so he was less than impressed, I think. And so we were like, okay, you know, we'll try again tomorrow. So show the next set. So we come back the next morning, and we decided to surprise the kids by taking the Maid of the Mist tour, which is a boat that you can get on to literally go down into the falls. And so we walk up, and you get to walk on like this exclusive walkway, which I'm scared of heights,
200 feet in the air.
I'm not gonna lie, that was not pretty. That was not good to get Christy across that walkway. But when you get across that walkway, right, like here, again, here's a lesson for us from Psalm 119. Like, sometimes when we trust God to lead us on a path, it's gonna take us to places that are terrifying. It's gonna take us to places that are really scary, and you've gotta make a choice. Which one's gonna lead you? Your fear or your faith? Because I could have been like, I am not walking across that bridge. Well, I wasn't talking.
It took a lot of guidance. I had to walk on the edge of the railing.
I don't do heights.
While Christy and Lynn were up against. This being said, the walkway to get out was a lot narrower than the walkway to get out, to get back to shore. So it was like a 3-foot walkway, walking across this thing on the edge. So it was a little intense.
But I want you to hear that, right? Like, God's gonna ask you to do things that are scary. God's gonna ask you to do things that are hard. And I think way too often we've got like big famous megachurch preachers who make it seem like you follow Jesus and it's all gonna be downhill and smooth sailing and everyone's gonna get a white picket fence, a hybrid car, and like their own airplane. It doesn't work like that. Not even a little bit does it work like that. So you gotta face some stuff to get to see what is really, really beautiful. So we get on this boat, and like, once in a lifetime, right? So like, I looked at Bryson and I'm like, is this better? Like,
I did tell him when we come back in the light, it's a different world than the light show covered up so much.
So, but here's the other thing, right? Like, sometimes God's gonna take us on places that it's like, you get to see some of the most amazing, breathtaking things. And sometimes it's nature, but guess what? A lot of times it's people. You get to see God do amazing things in the life of people if you're willing to invest in people's lives, if you're willing to connect in community. Like, I'm not, you know, Bob and I were talking about this, like, I could look and see things about, you know, poverty in general in the United States, and I could study them all day, every day, statistically, right? I can zoom into Missouri, I can zoom into Springfield, and still never actually get a front row seat of what it's like in our community and what those struggles are until we choose to put ourselves in a place where we experience that, right? And it's hard, and it's messy, and it's beautiful all at the same time. But Scott, show this next slide. often to get to what's really beautiful, though, you got to be willing to get dirty and wet and messy and drenched. Because literally, like, I don't know what I was expecting, but I mean, you go and you get, and it was a lot.
It seemed like we got way too close in a very big boat. It was pretty intense.
It was really crazy. But again, right? Like, if you're following God, God's going to take you to places you would have never imagined. And sometimes it's going to feel like, this is too much. This is too close. This is too hard. This is costing me too much. And I want you to know that that's the place we got to lean in even more, right? That's not the place to run away. That's not the place to say, this is too hard, I'm out. Like, you're out there now, baby. Like, you can't get off the boat. And I want you to hear this, because I feel a lot like kind of how David felt probably writing to Solomon. Like, I want you to get this. Because if you choose to follow God's path and let God's whispers be what guides you through the world, like one step after the other, God's not going to be like, okay, let me explain to you what's going to happen next year on February the 17th. Just be prepared. I'm giving you a heads up. You will find that out on Friday, February the 17th. One day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one step at a time. But don't let fear stop you. Don't let what looks hard stop you. Because if you will engage in that journey, you are going to see things and experience things and connect with people and have your life changed in ways you could have never, ever, ever, ever imagined.
And I just want to take a second, because as I'm sitting here and I'm looking at this picture, right, and we all have excuses on why we can't be in that situation, why we're not willing to take that walk. I'm too scared, I'm too broken, I'm too anything. And I just want you to point something out to you that I don't know if you noticed. If you look at the bottom left-hand corner of the second picture, you see a little piece of silver? Yeah. That's the little old lady that sat in her wheelchair right next to me on the bow of the boat and rode the entire way through the falls right next to me, just blown away by what she was seeing, but never asked to be moved, never asked to be pulled back, sat there the whole time. And so for me, that just seems iconic, that there's no reason why any of us can't take the walk that God's asking us to take. It's not going to be easy, and it couldn't have been easy, and it couldn't have been easy for her to see all these people standing around here enjoying it even at a different view. So that to me just says, look, you know, anybody deserves to be where God's calling us. It's just going to take work. And like Christy said, this is not a magic potion when you accept God and everything's just easier. I mean, that's just a lie. If I'm going to be honest, my life's been way harder since I accepted Jesus in my heart. When I was living in sin and just wallowing around in it, there was nobody to pull me down. There was nowhere to go. But the feeling when you walk out the other side and you can hold your head proud and you know that you're trying to do everything that you can to live the red letters of Jesus, and I fail every day. I know I hurt people. I say things. I can be the biggest jerk in the world, and I know that. It's not intentional, and I have to ask for forgiveness on a regular basis. But I still work on it every day, and I like to believe that I'm trying to live the red letters of Jesus. So I just say that.
So I got one more set of pictures to show you, and then we're going to get off of here. So if you notice, do you see how close the waterfall is behind us? So after we got off the boat, there's this hike straight up the side of this mountain, whatever you want to call it. It was huge. It was a lot of steps. And here's the thing, right? Like, everybody wants the selfie, right? Everybody wants the picture that looks so good. Like, look how cool that picture is with like the waterfall right behind you and the rainbow, and like, it's beautiful, right? But like, how many people want to walk the walk it takes to get to the place where you get to snap the picture? And I I want you to think about that in the sense of life, right? Like, how many people want the selfie and want to be able to say, you know, hey, it's my 2-year sobriety date, or hey, like, I walked away from this relationship, or hey, I am in this place now, I'm working full time now, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I left a job that wasn't satisfying and I pursued this crazy call on my life. And like, we want that, right? But it doesn't happen overnight. It happens one step at a time, and those steps sucked. Like, seriously, I had to stop a couple of times, and most of you know, like, I have this stupid, annoying heart condition, and I'm like walking up the steps, and I'm looking at my watch that's like, warning, 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 you should sit down. And I was like, nope, going to the top. And none of those journeys are ever going to be smooth. None of those journeys are ever going to be relaxing. We got to the top and we may be smiling, but we were all like this. Because it's exhausting and it's hard and life is hard and change is hard, and all of it requires us to put in the effort. But I promise you that the effort is always going to be worth it. Because it's going to change your perspective. It's going to change your view. It's going to change the people that are in your world. It's going to change the direction that you're headed. It's going to change what you get to experience. And it's going to change the stories that you get to tell. So when David writes Psalm 119 to Solomon, saying again and again, lean into the word of God, lean into the heart of God. That is what I thought about all this week, in addition to missing you a lot, was how much my greatest desire for each of us is that we lean in to the word of God. We lean in to the heart of God and the journey that he's calling each of you to, because it's unique and it's different, and it's not going to take you to the same selfie as everybody else, because we're each on our own journey. It's personal, it's unique, it's special, and it's yours. So own it and take it and start with those steps. And if you don't know where to start, grab somebody and say, I need to figure out what steps I need to take to start on a different journey, because this one's not working for me. God. Oh, God. God, I thank you for lessons that come in unexpected places. I thank you for lessons that sometimes just make your word come alive, more so than what it does on just a day-to-day basis. Sometimes I think I just need some of those out-of-the-box experiences that just remind me how big you are, how hard you love us, how hard you pursue us, the depths that you go for us, and the width of your perspective of what our journey can and could and should look like. God, it is my deepest heart that some of this came across tonight in conversation and in pictures, and that we can walk away from this space tonight challenged with a different perspective, challenged to look for you more in the everyday, challenged to dig our roots down deep, challenged to make changes in our lives, challenged to evaluate relationships, and choose to surround ourselves with people that are speaking life and love into us, encouragement. And God, that we are not going to let fear or obstacles keep us from continuing to fail forward and to go forward afraid and to make progress one step at a time. God, take each of us by the hand, by the heart, whisper to each one of us individually where you want us to go and where you're trying to lead us. In your name we pray.
We want to end this service with one of our favorite songs around here, a song called No Outsiders. I want to invite you guys to sing along with us, to listen whatever you need to do.
You have no borders. When I was a stranger knocking at your door, you took me in with no questions.
I was a sinner running from your grace, you called me friend. You called me friend. There are no outsiders to your love. We are all welcome, there's grace enough. When I have wandered, Lord, your cross is the open door. There are no outsiders. I'm not an outsider to your love. You are the harbor in every tempest. When my soul was shipwrecked, tossed upon the waves, you calmed the storm. You are the Father, there are no orphans. Every tribe and nation gathered in your arms, sing with one voice, sing with one voice. There are no outsiders to your love. We are all welcome, there's grace enough. When I have wandered, Lord, your cross is the open door. There are no outsiders. I'm not an outsider to your love. I was tired, I was poor, I was thrown upon your shores. I was homeless and afraid till I heard you call my name. Now I'm ransomed, I'm restored, resurrected, I am yours. I am loved, yes I belong. Oh, my soul has found its home. There are no outsiders to your love. We are all welcome, there's grace enough. When I have wandered, Lord, your cross is the open door. There are no outsiders. I'm not an outsider. No, there are no outsiders. I'm not an outsider to your love. I love you guys. I love hearing you sing, it's fun. Thank you, Bob and Christy, for sharing such a beautiful reflection of your experience. Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the top for you. We are, I should have looked at these ahead of time. So this next week, really kids are ramping up to get back to school, so we are doing some back to school clothing stock up. So if you have kiddos or you know someone who has kiddos that you could use some help with some cool school clothes, let Christy Johnson know. We've got those at the Outreach Center. We want to make sure kiddos have what they need as they're going back to school. That accounts for like daycare, preschool, any environment where kiddos are in need of some stuff with it. Well, it's not going to be cold for a while, but some nice stuff for that. Our second announcement is we've got some really cool growth. So as you know, I spend a lot of my time getting to lead next door with our Family Connection program. Rue has stepped up to actually lead that site next door. And that is because our Family Connection program, which for those of you who don't know, it's a program where we supervise visits for parents who are in the foster care system, providing love, support, and advocacy for those families. Our program is growing. So we've been able to expand to several different cities now across the state of Missouri. We actually have someone in Washington interested, like what? And then we've got a couple other churches here in Springfield. And so it's a really great opportunity to get involved and volunteer. So if you are interested at all, it's just really a time you get to hang out with a family, love on them, just provide some support for them and some advocacy during a really hard season. And so if you'd like to get involved, let Rue or I know, and we can connect you to either our location, or we have one now on the south side with Brentwood and in Republic. So the third one, Christy's actually going to come up and share.
So before I share, I'm going to say goodbye to our online campus. We love you guys. Thank you. We're not going to stream this part of our evening.